Gene Scarpulla is retired after working 30 years at the City of Baltimore's Reservoir Natural Resources section. His last 8 years serving as the city's watershed manager in charge of Prettyboy, Loch Raven, and Liberty Watersheds. He has a BS and an MS in biology with a concentration in ecology from Towson State College and Towson State University, respectively. Gene serves as the editor of the Maryland Entomologist and has just retired recently as the editor of Maryland Birdlife. He lives in Phoenix. Let me start over that sentence. He lives in Phoenix, Maryland, with his wife Marcia Watson and Rudy, their highly intelligent Lower Eastern Shore cat that adopted them. Please welcome Gene Scarpulla.
Eight. Minimize the window. Now you turn to the other thing. So, would you prefer to have yeah. Yes. Okay. Walk around. And then you go right, forward, backward, now. Well, but what was that? Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
No.
No.
Do I have to get closer?
Okay. It is.
I may need to hold it then.
Yeah.
That, or let's move it. All right, how's that? Is that better? Okay. No? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think I better hold it.
Okay.
All right. So let's make sure we have the correct talk on here. Yes, Howard County Bird Club. That's tonight. So this little cartoon. Hey, do you want to drive really far and spend hours staring at distant, rapidly moving gray-brown objects while trying to find subtle differences between them? And of course, the answer was no. What if they're bird-shaped? Then absolutely yes. Hey, shorebird season, woo. Okay, so what I'm few little introductory slides here, and then we'll get into the pretty photos. It's impossible to teach you everything about shorebirds in 1 hour tonight. And it's impossible. What?
Hold the mic up.
Hold the mic up.
Yeah.
Here, Marcia, stand next to me and hold it. And it's impossible to learn everything about shorebirds in 1 hour. So hopefully what I will present to you tonight will inspire you to use your field guides and definitely get out into the field to observe shorebirds. So what the talk is, it's kind of a starting point for you to get out. We're going to look at the more common shorebirds. I'm not going to discuss rarities. And I'm emphasizing the basic structure of the birds. So plumage, in some species I'll mention plumage, but we're looking mainly the structure of the bird, what it looks like, and we'll get into details on all of these. What habitat it occurs in, the location in Maryland where you would go to find these species, what season are they moving through or are here breeding, and how to separate similar species. What the talk is not finding or identifying rarities. So sorry, Joe, we're not getting into any rarities if you're okay. And I'm not going to emphasize the different plumages except for a few of the species. Oh, wait a minute, I'm too far ahead. I think, did I just do this one? I'm losing one. Yes, I just did that one. Okay. So what are shorebirds? It's the order Shorebirdiformes. These are all the shorebirds. We have 4 of the families of Shorebirds here in Maryland. The stilts and avocets, the oyster catchers, the plovers, and then the sandpipers, of which there are a ton of different types of sandpipers. So what are shorebirds? Well, they do inhabit shores, but also mudflats and grasslands. You can find some of the species in grasslands and even in forests. They generally are feeding on invertebrates. These can be insects, they can be worms, they can be any aquatic organisms that are down in the mud, anything like that. And they get around by running, walking, wading, and in some cases swimming. And you'll see those. The plumage varies throughout the year, whether they're in their winter plumage or in their summer breeding plumage. And then, of course, molting between these plumages. Not everything at the shore is a shorebird, and not all shorebirds are at the shore. I have had people say, yes, I'm going to go see shorebirds. We're going to go see, and then they'll mention the birds that are on this list. But these are not shorebirds. They're either waterfowl or the various seabirds, of which a lot of those are pelagic species, or waders, herons, egrets, and ibises, and then rails. So how I got started. Around 1994, I was interested in learning shorebirds, and I went in May to Bombay Hook, and I went one weekend. And I thought, well, this is fun. I'm going to come back next week. So I went the following Saturday. And then I went the following Saturday, and then the following Saturday. And I ended up going May through October. And this was great for learning shorebirds, because then you got to see that even though the plumage changes, once you learn the structure of the bird, then you can say, oh, that's this, even though it doesn't look like it does in breeding plumage. So this was very helpful. Then from there, I started at Hart-Miller Island, and I went out there almost every Saturday from May of '96 to December of 2008. And I started in May. The MOS conference was in Baltimore. It was at UMBC. And they were looking for people to lead field trips. And I said, well, I'll lead one out to Hart-Miller Island. And the field trip coordinator said, nah, there's nothing out there anymore. You can't find shorebirds. They're not there anymore. So I went out with my friend, Rick Blum. Rick was one of my mentors. We went out and there's shorebirds. So I came back in and I mentioned to the coordinator, I said, look, there's shorebirds out there. I still want to lead this trip. No, it's a waste of time. There's nothing out there. I said, no, I want to lead the trip. There's shorebirds. So we led the shorebird trip to Hart-Miller for the conference, and there were tons of shorebirds. So what had happened in the early days of Hart-Miller, once they would put in dredge material, that's what would attract all the shorebirds, all this nice muddy goop that was there. They would find lots of invertebrates to eat. And then through a period, I forget the exact years now, but maybe from 87 or so till 96, they weren't putting in dredge material, and it dried up and there were not a lot of shorebirds. But then when I started out again in 96, there were tons of shorebirds. And we would go out there every Saturday from 7 a.m. till either, back then, they could have a boat going back home at 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, or 7 o'clock. And some days we'd be there from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. There'd be so many shorebirds. Some days you'd had over 10,000 shorebirds out there. And I see David Holmes. I went out with David many times in the winter for the midwinter counts. So again, what we're going to discuss here is the structure of the birds, behavior of them, the habitat, a little bit about plumage. And in many cases, you need more than one field mark necessary to make an ID. If you just go with one field mark, you can really go off in left field somewhere. So structure, the size. Is it a small bird like the peeps, which are the small sandpipers? Or is it something big like a godwit? And you'll see examples of all of these. Bill shape and length. Is it short? Is it long? Is it pointed? Is it stubby? Different head shapes. Are they rounded? Are they flat? Leg length. Is it long like a yellow legs or is it short? Again, one of the small peeps like a least sandpiper. Primary extension. How far are the primary feathers, which are the tips of the wings, how far are they extending either beyond the tail or beyond the tertials? And you'll see in the slides what the tertials are. And then also the posture of the bird. The behavior. Well, of course, with the posture, it's affected by the structure, what the bird is built like. And that's how you can look at the different postures. Habitat. Some birds are always in the water. Some birds are along the shoreline. Some are in grasslands. Some are in the woodlands. It depends on the species. What's the feeding type? Some are probers, where they're probing in the mud, either on the shoreline or in shallow water. Scything. That's, you can see yellow legs doing that, where they're kind of going back and forth along the surface of the water. Or are they picking from the surface of the water? Or picking from the mud? If there can be like a hatch of different types of flies out on the mud, and they'll just be picking the flies on the mud. And then calls and vocalizations. Some of them are very diagnostic when we hear them. Plumage, leg color, it can be important, but birds with yellow legs, when they're standing in mud, they aren't yellow anymore, they're black. So bill color, that can be, again, another good clue with bill color, the overall color tone of the bird. And this applies for some of the small peeps that I'll get into, where the overall color is different from all three species. The color of specific feather groups. In certain species, these will stand out, certain feather groups that will tell you, oh, that's exactly what this is, and you don't need another field mark. And then any other obvious field marks. So with plumage, real quickly, going out there like I did from spring, summer, and fall. Spring migration, when the adults are coming through, they might be in breeding plumage, or they might be going into breeding plumage from their winter plumage. If they're in breeding plumage, it can be very striking, but very bright, colorful. And fall migration, and let me mention also, spring migration is short. It's basically 2 months, April and May. But fall migration is much longer. Starts around mid-July and goes through November. And the adults can be in all different looks to them, depending on where they are in the molt. So it can be any combination of what's left of the breeding plumage or what's in the winter plumage. They can be anywhere in between all of that. And then the juveniles, when they come through, they can be beautiful birds because they have all new feathers. They all come in at the same time. They can have bright feather edging on them. It gives them a scaly appearance. And again, you'll see slides of these. So just a little bit about topography. Let's try this one. Yes, it does work. Okay, I'm going to talk about a few things. Just a quick, these are the ears, basically the auricular feathers. Eye line, for a few of the species, the eye line or the supercilium, which is this white area over top. The shape of the crown will cover. And then the mantle is kind of like the center of the back up in here. Scapulars go a little farther down. What I'll mention, the tertials, which are these feathers down here, this can be important with dowagers. And you'll see that in the dowager slide. Primary projection can be how far they extend either beyond the tail or beyond the tertials. And then some other parts underneath, just the vent, the undertail coverts. And then I'll be mentioning on some of these, the breast and the flanks going down the side to the belly. So again, depending on the species, you don't need all of this, but for certain species, some of these are important. And in flight, you mentioned the three, this one. Primaries, these are your outer feathers here on the wing. Secondaries are in closer. Tertials then are down here. Now the axillaries I'll mention, these are important for the plovers. I'll call these the armpits. And in some cases, the armpits will be completely black, and in other species, they won't be completely black. And that's important for telling them apart in flight. So other things you might look for in flight. Does it have a bar in the wing? And how thick is the bar? And also the color of the rump, the tertials we will get into. And with some species, how far the legs extend beyond the tail. All right, are we ready? Now I think there might be one more. Oh, well, this is basically what I just said. The rump and the upper tail colors, coverts, and the auxiliaries, the armpits, wing stripes, and then the colors of the back, the tail, and the leg extension. I'll mention the breeding bird atlas. We have 8 species currently that breed in Maryland. These were all found in BBA3. Most of these were also in the previous 2 atlases. Now, 2 that we have lost, Wilson's plover, we lost many years ago. They would have been breeding in Ocean City, not like Ocean City is now, back when Ocean City looked like Assateague. And upland plovers, they were breeding during BBA1 and BBA2, the upper tier along the Maryland-Pennsylvania line, but they were not found in this latest atlas. And Wilson snipe is one of these where I think that it's breeding in Maryland and probably in Garrett County, but so far haven't been able to confirm that they are breeding out there. During the atlas, whenever I gave this talk, I would say, I will give someone, you win a prize if you can confirm Wilson snipe in Garrett County. I've got a shorebird, mug that I will give you, but they're still probable at this point. All right, now we will get into the birds themselves. The stilt navicet family, the Recurvorostridae, which means bent back bill. 2 species in Maryland. They're unmistakable. On all of these slides, you don't try to remember everything or try to read everything. The important things are what I have bold and with the asterisks. And of course, since this is being recorded, you can always go back and look at this and go through everything slowly. But the avocets are a little bigger than the black-necked stilt, but the important things for looking at a black-necked stilt, it's very vocal. And if you're anywhere near where they're breeding, they're constantly going, yip, 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 yip. Sorry, Marcia, I'm holding it to my mouth. Yip, 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 yip. And these are Maryland breeders, primarily on the Lower Eastern Shore. We did have them breeding out on Hart-Miller when I was doing BBA2 out there. We had several of these were breeding out there. Now, the important thing right here, there we go. I think we've gone dead.
Your finger's blocking the laser.
It is? Ah, there it is. Okay. With a black neck stilt, the important thing is the black neck. They have a black neck. Avocets do not have black necks. They're either rusty in breeding plumage or it's gray in the winter plumage. So that's one of the things that gives it away. The other thing that gives it away, with American avocets, they always have this white wing patch, whether they're in breeding plumage or in the lower slide where they're in non-breeding plumage. They always have that white stripe. So it's easy to tell the two, whether they have a black neck or they have a wing stripe. Then the oystercatcher family, the Hematopodidae. which means blood red foot, and I don't know why they call this thing blood red foot. The thing has a blood red bill. And the feet are kind of pinkish. So anyway, you can see this large, thick, bright red orange bill. When you see them, they're unmistakable. And they also have this bright red orbital ring around the eye. It shows up probably more in if you were looking at them in the field than on the slide here. And these are all Maryland or they are Maryland breeders and occur primarily in the coastal areas, the lower eastern shore, which is where you'd want to go to see these. These can be, you can see them from Ocean City. You can see them occasionally on Assateague or out on Skimmer Island or places like that. But yeah, the lower eastern shore, Assateague would be real good for seeing these. And the lapwing and the plovers. We have 5 species, and Shorebirds comes from plover, which comes from gully, which is supposedly where the plovers would breed in gullies. So roundabout, primarily 5 species we're dealing with. And these can be broken down into 3 categories. They either have double breast bands or single breast bands or no breast bands. So looking at the most obvious one, the double banded killdeer. These occur in every county. They have 2 breast bands in the adults, but don't be confused if you see any of the little immatures. These little juveniles down here, they only have a single band. But when you're looking at a juvenile, they have almost no wing. It's just little flappy things, and they're very downy looking. But these are your killdeer. And if you're anywhere near a nest, they're very vociferous. You'll hear them just yelling, killdeer, 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 the whole time you're out there, and they'll give this broken wing display to get you away from the nest. These occur in all counties, and they are permanent residents year round. And the single banded ones. These can be simple to tell apart 2 different things. They're basically the same size, semi-palmated versus piping. But look at the color of the 2. Brownish back and head on the breeding adult for a single banded, for semi-palmated, versus the pale gray back for piping plover. And why are they these colors? Well, look at the habitat they occur in. The semi-palmated plovers are generally found on mud, and that's where they're feeding, and they're the color of the mud. But piping plovers are this pale color that kind of matches the sand along the Atlantic beaches where they occur. So they blend in with the 2 habitats that they're in. Semi-palmateds are primarily spring and fall migrants, which is not to say you can't find them at other times of the year. Birds can occur at any time, but primarily they're migrating through in spring and fall. Whereas we have the pipings that are primarily found in Worcester County, down at Assateague, and they do breed on the shoreline there. And the unbanded ones, these 2, they can be a little tricky, but now I've got a list of things here. But basically, if you look through these, the black-bellied plover is chunkier. It's got a larger, rounded head. And these are comparing it to the American golden plover. It has a larger bill, thicker. It has shorter primaries that don't extend very far. And again, it's a migrant. Spring and fall, you can find these, but you can find them during other parts of the year as well. An American golden plover is much slimmer, much smaller, flat head, a smaller bill. Look at the slimmer neck, longer primaries, which you'll see in another slide where they extend beyond the tail here. And these are primarily a fall migrant. Occasionally, they can be found in Maryland in the spring, but almost, I'd say 99% of the time, you're gonna find them in the fall, not the spring. In breeding plumage, the things to tell them apart, black bellies are primarily black and white, whereas golden plovers are golden. They aren't black and white. And notice the vent, a white vent here in the black belly, and a white crown in the black belly. And it's different. You have a black vent and a black crown, or a dark crown, here on the American golden plover. So, but it is a smaller, distinctly smaller looking bird. So I was talking about structure. Now, these birds look a little closer with their plumage, but again, in non-breeding, look at the size. Black bellies are chunkier, they have a larger head, rounded head, a much larger bill, thicker neck, and shorter primaries. And unbanded. Well, I was looking over here at the clock, and it's catching after 1.
Yeah.
Twice a day.
8:20. All right, 8:20, yeah, I see. Okay, then these are the unbanded plovers again. The way to tell them in flight, black-bellied plovers always, no matter what the plumage, they have these black armpits under here, the axillaries. And if you look under American golden plovers, they do not, they have pale armpits. They also have a white rump versus the dark rump on the American golden plover. And the wing stripe, it's a little bit different. It's a little thicker in the black-bellied plover and a little thinner in the non-breeding American golden plovers. But the black armpits, that's what you want to look for in flight. Black armpits, you know you got black-bellied plovers, and their call is distinctly black-bellied. When you get to know it, I won't attempt to call like a black-belly, but it's a very distinctive call that they have. Then the sandpipers. There are a gazillion species here that I'll be covering, well, not quite a gazillion, but the Scarpulla, which came from the Greek or Latin for woodcock, which came from the Greek or Latin for long pointed stick, in particular talking about their bills. And I have these broken down into various groups. The larger sandpipers we'll deal with first, the godwits, Wimbrel, upland sandpiper, willet, and then the 2 yellowlegs. Godwits are pretty much unmistakable. They have such elongated bills on these 2 species. Marble godwit's a little bit bigger than the Hudsonian, but the thing to look for, the overall color of the birds. Generally, with a marble godwit, it's tawny overall, and if they lift their wings, they're cinnamon colored under the wings. And again, a migrant that moves through. Both of these are just migrants. Now, black belly, yeah, Hudsonians have a grayish black back, but in breeding plumage, they have reddish underparts. They can almost look like a dowitcher with this reddish color that they have on their breast. But if they lift their wings, they're black. They aren't cinnamon like the marble godwit. And again, both of these migrants, and you would find them primarily on mud flats, anywhere where you've got lots of mud. Wimbrel is another unmistakable one. The thing to look for, that long decurved bill, very, very apparent on these birds. They're an upright bird. They stand very tall, and then the head. You'll also see the brown stripes on the head. These are generally unmistakable when you see them. And then the upland sandpiper, which doesn't look like it was built correctly. They are very erect, but look at that long, very thin neck on these birds. It looks too thin for the bird. And a very small head, but with a very large dark eye. The eye is just so big for that small head. These are primarily, you'll find these on turf farms and farm fields, the place to look for them. Primarily a fall migrant, since they no longer apparently are breeding here in Maryland anymore. But yeah, in the fall, and they're not easy to find, I don't think, anymore. They were easier 40, 50 years ago. God, I've been birding a long time. And then the long-legged waders. I've got willet here, and I'll mention there are 2 subspecies of willets, and I will mention the 2 of them. But look at the size, greater yellowlegs and lesser yellowlegs. Greater is closer to a willet in size. Lesser yellowlegs is much smaller. So let's talk about the willets first. Eastern willets are the ones that we have that are here breeding in the salt marshes on the lower eastern shore. The really diagnostic thing that you can't miss on these, if they spread their wing or they're flying, that black and white wing pattern is very, very apparent on the birds. And they're very vocal when they're flying, or if they're anywhere near the nest, you'll hear them giving that, Bill will will it, Bill will will it. Again, you can find these West Ocean City, Assateague, anywhere down in the lower eastern shore. Primarily salt marshes, and they do breed here, like I said, in the coastal marshes in summertime. And I'll just mention this briefly. There are these 2 different subspecies, the eastern willet and the western. Westerns breed out west. Colorado, that area is where you'll find them. And we do have, when I was doing Hart-Miller, you would get both of these species out there during migration. Now again, the eastern willets were the summer breeders for Maryland coastal marshes, but both of these different subspecies occurred here at Hart-Miller moving through. And the eastern is on the left, western's on the right, and you can see the difference with the bill. It's a shorter, thicker bill on the eastern, and it has shorter legs, and it's a smaller bird. Whereas western willet's a larger bird, longer, thinner bill, and longer legs. And if they're side by side, it makes it even easier to tell them apart. But when they're not side by side, you know. And then here's the other ones that are easy when they're side by side. The lesser yellowlegs and greater yellowlegs. I mean, the size difference is so different, 14 inches versus 10.5. And the length of the bills and the overall shape of the birds. It's so simple when they're right side by side. But how often do we see them side by side? So generally, look for a longer, thinner bill, usually bicolored with greater yellowlegs. And it's a paler color towards the base, darker towards the tip. And of course, they have long yellow legs, as you would expect. These, as well as lesser yellow legs, can occur pretty much anywhere where there's water. Anywhere there's a shoreline, they're going to be around. And both these and lessers are primarily, they're migrants moving through spring and fall. Now the lesser, like I said, it's much smaller, has a shorter, thinner, straighter, dark bill. That's the important thing on this. And again, primarily in migration, where they're moving through salt marshes or anywhere where there's water edges. So how do we tell them apart? Again, the size, but greater yellowlegs is a little stockier in size with its body shape. Lesser yellowlegs is slimmer. the bill length, and I'll show you this in the next slide, where the bill length is 1.5 times the head depth on greater yellowlegs, but the bill length is equal to the head depth on lesser yellowlegs. The bills are different. The greater yellowlegs, it can be a little upturned, where it's shorter, thinner, and daintier with the lesser yellowlegs. And like I said, the greater yellowlegs, the bill can be pale at the base. So here's the difference when you're looking at bill shape and bill length. You'll notice on the left, the greater yellowlegs, the difference here, the bill length is 1.5 times the head depth between these red marks here. Whereas lesser yellowlegs, it's pretty much equal, the length of the bill versus the head depth, which looks very easy again, looking at this slide. But once you're in the field, again, they can look a little different. And then behavior, they kind of feed the same way, picking or scything on the water. But greater yellowlegs, when they're feeding, they can be very frenetic, just darting around here and there and there, and all over the water surface when they're feeding. And then the call, which is interesting because sometimes you can hear these, you're walking in the forest and you'll hear these things fly over. And you go, oh, 2 notes. It's a lesser yellowlegs. Or you have 3 notes, and it's a greater yellowlegs that just flew over. Obviously, you want to be near water when this is happening, not very far away from water. But that's good also in the field if they're on them in the water walking around feeding. If they're doing the 2 note calls or 1 or 2 note calls versus the 3 or more 2 notes. Then the mid-size, we've got a bunch here. I break these down into 5 different categories. And the first 2, they're very inland ones. These aren't that difficult to tell apart. Look for, with Wilson snipe, they have that striped head, distinctly striped back, and the barred flanks. A migrant, but probably a Garrett County breeder. So if any of you next breeding season want to go out and try and document these up at Garrett County. And then American woodcock, these are really neat looking birds. They have a barred head instead of a striped head. So the barring goes across the head and not from the front to the back. The buff colored underparts, very smart looking. And look at the eyes. They're very high set, these birds. It's almost towards the crown of the head. These are permanent residents. They're around throughout the year and they breed throughout Maryland. You can hear these in the wintertime if you're doing Christmas counts. You can hear them kind of snorting, a sound that they make when they're in wet, grassy areas near water. It's a kind of a snort that they do. Then these 3 are the probers, the ones that feed in sewing machine type motion. And all are migrants, and the things to look for. Short-billed dowitchers is up top. Notice the long bill, and it tends to be kinked down a little bit right in here. Long-billed, it's a long straight bill. And they are about the same size, the 2 species. Stilt sandpiper is much smaller. It has a shorter decurved bill than the dowitchers and longer legs. And this is important that they have the longer legs and the shorter bill. So again, showing the bills. Look at short-billed dowitcher up top. The bill is kinked right in here, just a little bit down, whereas it's very straight in the long-billed dowitcher below it. And stilt sandpiper, it's a shorter bill and decurved. So when they're out standing in the water, if they're just standing and not feeding, the dowitchers have shorter legs versus the longer legs of stilt sandpipers. And the dowitchers have the longer bills than the shorter decurved bill of the stilt sandpiper. But again, they're feeding the same. Now, if they're feeding side by side, you get a nice comparison. The next slide. Dowitchers have a horizontal feeding position because they have short legs and a long bill. So they're horizontal when they're feeding. But look at the stilt sandpiper. They have long legs and a short bill. So they're tipped. Their tail is tipped up when they're doing this sewing machine. So that's very, very easy to separate them this way, looking at what position they're in when they're feeding. And of course, dowitchers are a little chunkier, whereas stilt sandpipers are slimmer. But when I first saw this slide from Bill Hubick, I said, this is great. I love this slide. Definitely have to put this in the presentation. Another thing for short bill and long bill, and I don't always find this easy to see in the field, but generally short-billed dowitchers have a flatter back, whereas long-bills have a more rounded back, and the hump at the rounded back tends to be at the center, whereas the hump at the shoulder for the short-billed dowitchers. But again, this can be difficult to tell in the field. Now the juveniles, these are so pretty when they come through in the fall. Short-billed dowitchers, they're early. You'll see these coming through in August. And look, these are the tertials back here, and they're barred. And juveniles have this bright orange feather edging along all the feathers, these new feathers that they have on their back and mantle and the wings. Versus longbills, these dowitchers, the longbills come through later in the season. So maybe end of September, but October, November is when you'll see a lot of these juvenile dowitchers coming through. And what to look for in the longbills, it's very subtle. But again, they have this scaly appearance because of the new feathers that have come in. It's a dull reddish feather edging, but it's not real apparent. It's easy not to see that. But look at the tertials. They're not barred on the tips here versus, now this only applies to these juveniles, because once you get into next year and everybody's kind of in their adultish plumage, everybody has these barred tertials, so you can't tell them apart then. But the juveniles, you can, like this. And generally, when you're looking, if you find a dowitcher in the wintertime, the odds are it is a long-billed dowitcher, not a short-billed dowitcher, because they should be long gone. Then we have 5 species that occur along the Atlantic coast. All 5 are migrants, kind of distinctive looking here, and we'll get into them real quick. Okay, red knots, chunky bird, tubular, tapered bill. And look at the bill, and of course, depending on the angle that the bird is when it's getting photographed, the bill length will look different. But in general, these will look tubular and tapered. You'll find these at horseshoe crab mating areas, primarily along the Delaware Bay. Is the place to look for these. Springtime is the time. You can get them other times, summer and fall, but primarily these are spring migrants. And I'll give you one quick anecdote about these. When I started at Hart-Miller, I was going out there with some of my mentors year after year initially. And I had been doing Bombay hook, and then I was doing every Saturday out there at Hart-Miller. And one day I was out there with 2 of my mentors, and they're having this discussion about 3 birds that are on the other side of the large cell at Hart-Miller. So about a mile away, we're looking at it through scopes. And they said, well, I think it's this because no, I think it's this because it's no, I think, and they're going back and forth. So I'm looking through my scope. Now, again, I've been doing this for a long while, maybe 2 years. And I'm looking at them. I said, well, why aren't they red knots in winter plumage? And they're just going, nah. Well, when we walked around the island, got to the other side, there were 3 birds. And it was 3 non-breeding red knots that were there. And I said, wow, I think I've arrived. I identified these birds. And ruddy turnstones. These are attractive birds. They have a fairly short pointed bill, but the thing that stands out in all plumages, whether it's breeding, non-breeding, or juvenile, is upside down question mark. It's always there. No matter what plumage they're in, you'll see this upside down question mark. And these are primarily migration, and you can find them in wintertime. Ocean City, again, the inlet is good for a lot of these species in the winter. Purples, another place for these. The Ocean City Inlet, also Harrington Harbor and North Beach and Chesapeake Beach down in Anne Arundel County. And I guess that goes into Calvert. Yeah, Anne Arundel and Calvert. Chunky bird, but they have these orange legs, that long, thin, slightly decurved bill that bends down, and orange base to the bill. These kind of things will stand out as the things to look for. In the wintertime, depending on the sun's angle, they can look kind of brownish or they can look kind of gray for the upper parts. And you can see the upper one looks kind of brownish, whereas the middle one looks more grayish. But they do blend in with the rocks. And you can see in the bottom slide how they kind of fit in. They just kind of blend with the rocks on the rock jetty there. And again, primarily these are there in the winter time. You can occasionally get them in migration, but these are primarily a winter species. Dunlin, another attractive bird when they're breeding. These are so smart looking. You can find these again places like Bombay Hook, any place on the eastern shore like that, salt and fresh marshes. Primarily migration, but you can also find them in winter. You'll find birds in this non-breeding plumage like the one at the bottom. But look at the shape of the birds. They're basically, the structure of the bird is the same in all 3 photos, especially the bottom 2, because they're facing the same way. So even though there's no coloration really for this non-breeding bird, the shape matches for Dunlin. And then sanderlings. It's very seldom you will see a sanderling in breeding plumage, because generally they don't reach their full breeding plumage until they get up into the Arctic. So when you're seeing them, they're either molting into their plumage, but the time where it's easy to see them is the winter time when they're down, go to Ocean City on the beach, and they can be there as well as the rock jetty. But in the winter time, they look like, whoop, wrong one. They look like this. But the thing to note, in winter, of course, they are the palest sandpiper. But notice in all the plumage, it's a little harder to see in the breeding plumage. They have black at the bend of the wing. And remember that. This is part of a quiz that will come up at the very last slide. One of the very last slides, this black bend of the wing for sanderlings. But again, ocean beaches, jetties, and you'll find these running in and out with the surf. You know, with the waves that come in, they're coming up, going back down, going up, going back down. But migration in winter is the time to see these. And the other mid-sized sandpipers. Spotted are unmistakable when they're in breeding plumage. These are Maryland breeders, tail bobbers. If you see them standing, they're bobbing their tail up and down and up and down as they're walking. And in flight, they have very, very stiff wing beats. They might go 2 wing beats and glide, and 2 more wing beats and glide. Very distinctive wing beats. Breeding plumage, again, unmistakable with the spotted underparts. But one thing that you notice, whether they're in breeding or non-breeding, is right here, this white patch. So the birds look, I mean, structure-wise, they look the same, but plumage-wise, they're very different. But they do have that white patch in front of the bended wing, whether they're in breeding plumage or non-breeding. Solitaries, these are so attractive when they're in breeding plumage. But the thing to look for is this bold eye ring. No matter what plumage, you'll see this bold white eye ring. And they have a long, thin, straight bill. They look a little bit like yellow legs. They do not have yellow legs, though. If you see them, the legs, you have a good view. They are olive greenish. They're not yellow. And again, these are a migrant coming through spring and fall. And then pecks. I keep saying attractive, but some of these birds are just so attractive. Pectoral sandpipers with that heavily streaked breast. These are, just striking the way they look. And look at it's a straight, tapered, bicolored bill, tail at the base. Pretty much anywhere where you can find water. They can be freshwater, saltwater, anywhere, edges of ponds, migrants, spring and fall migrants. And then buff-breasted, the last of this group. These are a fall migrant. That's the time to look for them. And generally, you want to go where there's wet, muddy, plowed fields or turf farms. That's the place to look for these. They're very buffy colored, and look for the prominent black eye that stands out on these birds. Three different shots of them here. So I'm not mentioning all of the other little characters because they're not really the important ones for separating these out, for identifying. And then please don't call them peep. Okay, these are the two that a lot of people put in with the smaller peep, white rump sandpiper and Baird sandpiper. White rumped, they are migrants, spring and fall. Wings are long, they extend beyond the brain. Oh, hold it, I need ginger ale. Careful. All right. Let me wipe off. Of course, ginger ale got on the outside of the bottle. Okay, white rumps, migrants. The wings are long, they extend beyond the tail. And the body appears elongated longitudinally, not like the peep where they're kind of compact. These are a longer bird. And the white rump, you can see it in flight if they're in flight. Occasionally you can see it when they're not in flight, but you have to be lucky. And the other thing that I noticed on these birds, if they're feeding and they're kind of facing towards you, their wings, their primaries are up so high because they're so long, you can actually see through them underneath to see the tail. But it's a little gap because the wings are so high, so long and high. What else do I have? Oh yeah, in breeding plumage, pinstriping. They remind me of the New York Yankee uniforms. this pinstriping that they would have on their breast and going down the flanks in breeding plumage. And they have a lot of chestnut that they can have on their head and in the shoulder areas. That rufous on the crown and the shoulders, but very attractive. Wintertime, they're very gray looking. But again, the shape is the same. Birds are very similar, but they look much different. These are primarily a fall migrant, and when you see them, they're juveniles that are coming through. It's very seldom that you get an adult here in Maryland. But again, they're the shape of a white rump. They're elongated, but of course, no white rump. The wings extend beyond the tail. Primarily in the fall, that's when you want to see these. And it's almost always these juveniles. Very seldom that adults come through here. And they're very scaly looking. They have these white feather edges along all their feathers on their back. Very attractive when they're coming through. Again, you want to look for these in the fall. And then the peeps, the smaller ones, least semi-palmated and western. All right, small peeps. Showing the difference, of course, leg color. Least sandpipers have yellow legs. If you can see them and they haven't been in mud. But the bills are different in these birds. Look at the top for the least. It's got a tapered, pointed, slightly decurved bill. And you have big yellow legs. Semi-palmated. It's a short, it can be long, but generally it's a short, straight, tubular, blunt tipped bill, whereas Western sandpipers are generally long and they're tapered. And they can look drooped at the tips. And then I'll just mention the plumage. You can see of the three, and I'll mention this as we get through and get some more slides, that least sandpipers are the brownish of the three. Western are the brightest of the three, and semi-palmated are the grayest of the three. So looking at least, again, tapered, pointed, slightly decurved bill, the yellow legs, and they're always the darkest brown of the three species. Semi-palmated, short, usually, straight, tubular, blunt-tipped bill. But the eastern populations that we have around here, the females can have long bills. That could throw you off and think that you've got something else, that you've got a Western sandpiper. But again, look at the overall coloration, very gray birds. Western sandpiper, long, tapered, slightly decurved bill, which you can see it best in the middle slide and the bottom slide, where it's decurved. And they are, in breeding plumage, they are the brightest ones. And then usually the problem is trying to separate Western from semi-palmated. The general structure of these birds, Western usually has the longer bill, and in these slides you can see the longer billed birds are the Westerns, slightly larger size, the bigger heads, thicker necks, and chunkier bodies. And you can, like down here, the bill is just so much different and longer than you would find in the semi-palmated. And the same here, you can see how long this bill is in the middle versus the shorter bill on the right. And then the last group, the spinning swimmers, the three fowlers. Wilson's is the most common that you would find. None of them are common, but the most common you would find inland redneck phalaropes and red phalaropes. Generally, you got to go out on a pelagic trip to see these. Usually they're floating around. While they're floating, they're spinning in circles, feeding on things. Females are brighter colored than the males, and they're polyandrous. The female and males have role reversal. So after the female and male mate, the female lays her eggs. The male is the one that incubates the eggs. She goes off, finds another male, and she mates, lays another clutch of eggs, leaves him the eggs to incubate, and she just walks away. So they're quite different. Again, occasionally during migration, these will come through. Wilsons, if you see them in breeding plumage, they're really nice. They do have very long bills. Now this one isn't facing sideways, so you can't see it. But this is the length of the bill in a Wilson's, long, thin, and occasionally they'll be here during migration. The only one of the three species. Redneck, very attractive if you see them in breeding plumage. But usually when I've seen them, they're like the one at the bottom, non-breeding plumage. But the thing to look for if you're seeing these and they're floating around, you know you've got a phalarope. Look for the stripes on the back. If there's stripes on the back, it's a redneck phalarope. And they do have this black behind the eye here, but that's it. It's a short, thin black bill. Then when you get to the next species, that again, pelagic, the females are beautiful on the breeding grounds, but generally you're not going to see them. You're going to see them more in the winter plumage, non-breeding. They do not have stripes on the back other than when they're in breeding plumage. Should come back here. Yeah, when you see those side by side, redneck versus red do not have stripes on their back. They can look similar by having this black patch behind the eye, but again, no stripes here versus the stripes on the redneck. Okay, now here's the quiz. What's wrong with this comic? How to be a peep. Probe for food, warble, 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 pause for a tiny scream, and then warble, warble. So what's wrong with this? It's not a peep, you're right. What has the black shoulder?
Oh, yeah, you told us to remember this.
I told you to remember. That's a sanderling. That's a sanderling. All right, and a few last slides here, and I will get away from here. General, if you want just general field guides, the ones I would recommend, I always recommend the National Geographic Field Guide, and the latest edition came out in 2025. These are excellent for shorebirds and gulls and things that I love like that. And then the Sibley Guide, I don't use it personally, but that's another one that does have some good photos, not photo. I can't remember. Is that photo? They're paintings. They're paintings. Yeah. Yeah, both of these are paintings. When I started, the two shorebird guides were these, Shorebirds and Identification Guide, which you can still find around. I don't think these have ever been updated. I know the paperback ones have a later date, and they may have been revised somewhat in the paperback ones. Shorebirds of the Pacific Northwest, I didn't think it would be that good. It's a wonderful reference. They give side-by-side comparisons of a lot of these species. It's a great reference. And then these were the three that came out in the later years. I am choking here. I have to stop. And the latest one, of course, with Michael O'Brien's The Shorebird Guide. but any of these are good. Any are good. Photo acknowledgements. I couldn't have done this without Bill Hubick and Jim Stass letting me use all their photos. And they are both allowing me now to use all their photos for Gulls 101 that I'm putting together.
All right.
So whenever I get that done, I'm not sure yet, but I'm working on it. And there were also supplementary photos that were here from a workshop that was put together in 2007 by MOS on shorebirds. And there were other people that donated photos, and I used some of these that were on here listed. And then special acknowledgement to Marcia Watson for twisting my arm to create this thought. So that was Marcia. Thank you. Hopefully it's left you with some insight into identifying shorebirds and not left your mind spinning like a ballerina. Oh, wow. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much. You didn't have your camera.
Just a minute.
Yeah. It's fine.
I'll take a picture. There you go. For a photo. Here you go.
Oh,
There you go. There you go. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Perfect. All right.
John
I
Henry.
was going to say
Mary
one
Lou.
thing.
John Henry.
If you do have questions, email me. Since we don't have time tonight, just email me if you have any questions.
And the presentation is recorded and it takes a couple of days, but Kelsey will put it on our website if you want to re-review all of this great information. Thank you so much. And Mary Lou has something to say.
Oh, she always has something to say. So I looked at Tom's talk on the trip to Costa Rica last year. And I looked at my computer and I'm telling you, I love sitting here in the audience, but I got so much more out of going through each one of those slides on my computer, and Gene's slides are exceptional. So that's what he said, look, guys.
Thank you for coming. And next month we will have Bonnie Ott will be presenting birds of wetlands, lakes, and ponds.
Yeah.